this video, I'm going to be answering a question we sometimes get from clients, which is what's the difference between investing with Stockspot versus buying a diversified ETF like VDHG or VDGR, which are both Vanguard diversified funds. I'd start by saying there's a lot of similarities between investing with us and one of these diversified funds. The main one being that both Stockspot and some diversified ETFs invest in a diverse range of underlying assets. So across shares, bonds, both local and global shares, and other assets. Both our portfolios and other diversified funds do give you a mix of assets that help to give you a smoother return over the long run versus just buying a single asset class. A big difference with Stockspot versus many of these diversified funds is our allocation to gold. Most diversified funds I've seen in Australia, and super funds for that matter, don't have much of, if any, allocation to gold. And we really see a big benefit of the gold as a diversifier, particularly in environments where both shares and bonds are doing poorly at the same time. That often happens when inflation expectations are rising, like we saw in 2022. Another big difference is that within our portfolios, we try and pick the best fund, or what we believe is the best fund for each asset class, regardless of who the underlying fund manager is. And that's why we have some funds from Vanguard, some from BlackRock, some from BetaShares, some from other providers. We don't really mind who the provider is. We just do the research and try and work out what is the best underlying product to reflect the asset class that we're trying to invest into. Whereas typically when you invest into these diversified funds that are provided by a single issuer, all of the underlying funds are their funds. They're obviously not going to sell other people's funds, they want to sell their own, but it may mean you miss out on the benefits of actually accessing other funds, which may be better funds in some categories. And the third difference I would like to point out between investing with Stockspot and other diversified funds is really a tax issue. And this is a bit of a niche tax issue that I know a lot of people online, particularly on Reddit, have discovered with these diversified funds, which is that I think a lot of people assume that these diversified funds own a bunch of ETFs, when in fact these diversified funds own, and using VDHG and VDGR as an example, 7 underlying unlisted funds. And there's an important difference between ETFs and unlisted funds when it comes to tax. Because with unlisted funds, when someone redeems from that fund or takes money out of that fund, the fund manager has to go and sell some of the underlying securities, and then that leads to a potentially capital gain, and that capital gain then gets passed on to the remaining investors in that fund as a distribution. So if you're staying in a fund over the long run, it's not ideal because people who are leaving the fund end up passing on their tax consequences to you, and every year you're getting a tax bill for the tax that they've incurred. And this is actually one of the benefits of investing into ETFs, is that tax, when investors are leaving an ETF, actually gets streamed to the market makers and doesn't actually go to the underlying investors. So why is this important when you're investing in diversified funds? Well, you have to be very careful when you're investing into these funds, because some of them don't invest into ETFs as the underlying investments. They're investing into unlisted funds. And I think a lot of investors in these have recently found out the hard way that even if they're being sensible in investing for the long run and not themselves realizing capital gains or selling, they're actually inheriting the tax liabilities of other people who are leaving these funds, which becomes a tax drag on your overall return. And so that would be something I'd be cautious of, but also factor into your considerations when looking at diversified funds. Going back to the 3 that I've mentioned, one is what are the underlying asset classes that are being invested into? 2, who are the different fund managers that are used within it? And is there a diverse group? Are you getting the best of different fund managers or only a single fund manager? And then finally, the tax consequences. Are you only paying the tax that you yourself are incurring, or are you inheriting tax that other investors in that fund are creating for you?